MFT Counseling Theories, Chapter 6, Psychodynamic Models, the Family Therapy Overview. We're going to approach this particular module from two perspectives. One, we're going to talk about the founding theorist in psychodynamic theory among marriage and family work. And we're going to look at some psychodynamic interventions. So, page 125. Family therapists tend to share a common view of the family as a context for relationships and a process of addressing family interactions. Under the umbrella of systemic theory, systems theory, we're looking what lies both within and without the system, multiple inputs and possible paths of actions for agencies of change, always including cultural, contextual, environmental factors that overlay that work. There's less and less acceptance of one purist model, simply because families don't fit comfortably into one model typically. Eclectic is a dirty word. This is basically, I don't know what I'm doing, so I've just thrown a lot of theories and interventions together. Whereas
prescriptive is okay.
Prescriptive and integrative are okay. Integrative is, I know all the theories across the continuum. I can selectively, prescriptively pick and choose the ones that will fit this family, and not only across trans-theoretical lines, but within interventions. There's a great deal of larger acceptance of diversity of ideas in the field and versus just specific set of therapeutic interventions, as it was when the marriage and family systems theory were being developed by each practitioner. Prochaska and Norcross on page 126 contend that there's a modality orientation of family therapy, and they're the ones that came up with the word eclecticism, which is morphed into integration. Remember that Prochaska and De Clemente went forward to propose a theory of change, agencies of change, and stages of change. So the place of theory. The theoretical foundation of the field of family therapy demands to be strengthened, lest it just becomes a set of empirically derived interventions and techniques. Theory is much more than just the interventions and technique. It's the way we view our clients, ourselves, others, and the world. It goes back to object relations. It goes back to theories of personality development, cognitive development, human growth and development, morality, spirituality, everything, philosophy. It's rooted in philosophy. The things that make us who we are, and how do we get to there? How do we evolve into that being? And what does that mean in the interconnectedness of ourselves within a larger super system, and ourselves within subsystems and family systems and community systems? So in order for a new idea to be considered grounded theory, new work to become grounded theory. And remember that while we study in these courses, probably somewhere between, in the marriage and family, 12 to 15 models, the counseling theory models somewhere around the same number, 12 to 15, with some overlay psychosocial stage theory, morality theory, human growth and development theory, cognitive development theory, career development theory. There are somewhere around 450 established, accepted theoretical models, most of which counselors at large do not even use. So the criteria for grounded theory: is it comprehensive? Does it deal with family functioning? Is it trivial? Is it oversimplified? Does it fit a large swath of families? Is it culturally specific or culturally diverse? Is it parsimonious? Is it so small? We've chosen something with so few assumptions and constructs that we can't generalize it to larger family groups across the cultural continuum. Is it verifiable? Does it generate predictions about behavior that can be confirmed with relevant empirical data? Is it precise? Do we have operationalized definitions of terms? Are they explicit? Do they relate to each other and to the data? Does it avoid relying on figurative, metaphorical, analogical language? Is it empirically valid? Valid meaning, does it test what it proposes to test? Is it reliable? Do the results remain the same across a period of time? Is it stimulating? Is it going to highlight both strengths and deficits within the theory? Freud, as a seminal theorist, was one of the very few that said that his work was incomplete and that other theorists would come behind him, find flaws, find holes, find gaps, and add to his work. He was less than pleased when that began to occur with Adler and Jung, but he did acknowledge early that that would be the case. Psychoanalysis, both as a theory and as a form of practice, deserves recognition because it's the founding central role that defined and established the nature of psychotherapy. Looking at the top of page 129, many of the family systems pioneers, Ackerman, Bowen, Liszt, Jackson, Mnuchin, Nguyen, Nog, all men, were not very far from psychoanalytic roots in systemic theory and thinking. So Sigmund Freud, founder of psychoanalysis at the turn of the 20th century, saw from his work with little Hans, which we've discussed in this class before, that he unconsciously had an intense fear of castration by his father as a jealousy reaction to the love that little Hans had with his mother in a somewhat dysfunctional, less than healthy relationship. Yes, he was able to turn an internal danger into an external one. The fear was displaced into a substitute object, and that fear being placed on a substitute object is the prototype of Freud's definition of phobia. So from that case, Freud elaborated to the use of defense mechanisms, unconscious ego devices that a person will call on to protect themselves against being overwhelmed by anxiety. And little Hans was the first case history in the history of both child analysis and family therapy. Freud chose not to work with either the child or the family, worked only with the father as a physician. And he had the father treat his own son under Freud's supervision. Probably not the best model according to the thought processes that we have today. But Freud did not see himself as a practitioner for children. He saw adults, and this is the way that he was able to rationalize, to use one of the defense mechanism terms, a way to treat the family without treating the family. He saw individuals. So Bowen, in 1975, saw that one psychoanalytic principle that may have retarded early growth of the family therapy movement was the isolation of the therapist-client relationship, feeling that family members would contaminate the relationship between the client and the therapist. Obviously, that's changed. Contributing partners were Adler and Sullivan, both on the test. Alfred Adler was a Freud disciple. He became disassociated with Freud when he began to apply his own thoughts and expand psychoanalysis into psychodynamic. And it's said again, but it doesn't hurt to repeat. Freud saw psychoanalysis as deconstructing and understanding the roots of dysfunction. And once those roots were understood, therapy was over because self-awareness had been achieved. The unconscious and the subconscious had been risen to the conscious level. We knew what was wrong. There was no need for further treatment. Adler, Sullivan, Jung said, no, we have to have a dynamic for change. We cannot just simply analyze and let it go. We have to then show how to remediate and treat. So Adler developed views divergent from psychoanalytic theory and emphasized the importance of social family factors as opposed to Freud's drive theory. What drives this behavior? And Freud saw sex aggression and to some degree anxiety as the driving forces of interpersonal dysfunction. So Adler was much more holistic. You hear Adler's work being called individual psychology. He believed that all behavior is purposeful, that actions are goal-directed. I want to meet my need. Very much intertwined with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Even if I'm trying to meet my needs dysfunctionally, because that's the only way I know how, I'm still trying to meet my needs. Adler was originally, I think, in Germany. And when he saw the rise of Nazism, he moved to New York City so he could continue the work that he was doing. Harry Stack Sullivan, definitely a theorist on the large AA MFT test. He was psychoanalytically trained, influenced by sociology and social psychology at the Washington School of Psychiatry. He saw interjects between the mother-child dyad, that these early infant formative experiences explain the world. Is it good or bad? Is it me or not me? What do I think about myself, others, and the world? Always basically the same thing. Don Jackson, Murphy Bowen became outstanding figures in the field of family therapy. They were trained under Sullivan and under Frieda from Reichman. Clearly influenced by Sullivan's early notion of redundant family interactive patterns. So we're redundant in that we're going to give you the same message over and over and over until that feedback loop is successful in bringing you back into the expectations of the family. So the classical psychoanalytic drive theories, Sigmund Freud. Object relations, was Kohut. I don't see his name in this text. There it is in text. Self-psychology theories, Heinz Kohut, the role of narcissism, love of self, as an organizing determinant of personality development. Precursor for love for others. If you cannot love yourself, how are we going to know how to offer love to others? Page 132. Freud acknowledges subordinate roles in the environment, that we need food, we need safety, we need survival, we need others to have healthy personality formation, we need a family context, but he was insistent that treatment was individually focused. So in that regard, in some ways, he was the first LPC. He relied on analyzing and resolving patients' transferent neurosis as a way to relieve anxiety and neurosis and suffering in his client. It's, if you see this on the test, very simple. Transferent is from the client to the therapist. I am transferring previously learned dynamics to my therapist. I really like you because you remind me of my mother, my grandmother, my sister, my father, a teacher I really liked. Works okay at the beginning. It tends to derail when the reality sets in that even though there's certain characteristics that are similar, that the therapist is not and cannot be this other person. Countertransference is much more significant. We kind of expect our clients to experience some transference with us. If they don't form a good relationship, they don't have some basis of forming a relationship, they're not going to continue to come. But countertransference, the COUN for counter and the COUN for counselor, is the counselor to the client. I like you because you remind me of my little boy. I don't like you because you remind me of my ex-husband. When you get into family therapy and you have a male and a female with a partner or a same-sex partner that are having problems, and you remind me exactly of the best friend who betrayed me, or I was married to someone or partnered with someone just like you. And that kind of transference creates triangulation and an unfair balance.
Can it be eliminated, or is it only mitigatable?
Freud said it's impossible not to occur. That the cure for it is awareness, counselor awareness.
Our current ethical models allow for some of that. They believe, like Freud suggested, true?
They believe that it's unavoidable. But if you have, we are supposed to be educated and trained.
Yeah.
So we're supposed to be, and we're supposed to have self-awareness, mindfulness, intentionality, thoughtfulness. So we should pick up on those cues in ourselves and be able to pigeonhole and say, not my ex-husband. Whatever's going on in this relationship is not happening to me. It's happening to this couple in front of me. And if I cannot separate it, then if I can't pigeonhole it, then I'm not the person to see that. Okay. It's really an issue when you're dealing with offenders, because offenders tend to have, mandated clients tend to have great personalities, very charismatic, and counselors repeatedly, if you watch the news, get swept away into some of these personality issues, thinking the person, ascribing to the person personality traits that they don't actually possess, and then behaving as if that person does possess those traits. If you look at just something recently in the news about a prison guard who was caught up with 2 inmates and was going to help them escape because they were...
I heard that on AMP.
Okay. Wasn't a counseling situation, but it's still the same idea. Okay. So if there's not a level of awareness that this is where I'm at, then we're in trouble. And who has the greater power differential, the greater responsibility, the greater education? The therapist. Who is responsible for this? The therapist. Always. So deviations from classical views. There's a little bit about slip with psychoanalysis and family therapy. Saw them as potentially complementary. Both involved in the genesis and maintenance of psychopathology, which is kind of interesting because he's saying that families both create the genesis of psychopathology, but then it also has to be maintained by family interactions, or God forbid the person might get well. Nichols argues the restoration of individual dynamics into psychodynamic family therapy. No matter how much attention is focused on the entire family system, he believed that the individual client had to remain separate from the family story. He had a very holistic view, interactional psychodynamics, with a lot of attention to circular nature of personal and family dynamics. Slip and Nichols are not highly focused on in any work that I have seen recently.
If he believed, emphasized the circular nature of personal and family dynamics, whence the drive for keeping the individual separate from the family story?
He's saying that we had to pull them out. To get their story, they had to be pulled out. That yes, they're part of the larger family story, but they should not, in therapy, just be enmeshed in that.
A character.
That each person should have a chance to come front and center and have their own issues dealt with. And the reality is, it's like anything else. If you take it all as a whole, you get a much better theory than if you break it down by individual pieces. It's very much like the 10 blind men trying to determine what the elephant looks like, and each has a different piece. So, co-op with object relations therapy. Freud's classical position was that a baby is born as a blank screen, and patients that they have fantasies of their families projected upon them. They try to participate in a holding, safe, nurturing setting, a holding environment, shared holding. Well, and object relations is actually co-ed. but he was a Freud disciple. He added to Freud's work into object relations. Object relations meaning that when I'm born, I cannot distinguish myself from the person who's caretaking me. So if that person is warm and loving and acceptance and attentive, I'm very secure. If that person is kind of sketchy, there sometimes, loving sometimes, very hostile, angry sometimes, very absent sometimes, then I'm very needy and insecure because I can't get going on whether you're going to be there for me or not. And if the person is just totally hostile, totally absent, then I become very avoidant in my attachment. And object relations has to do with introject. Introject meaning the person outside of me becomes introjected into my own mentality and psyche, so that I say the world is good or bad. The world is caring or uncaring.
Interjections are interpretations of another person taken into yourself.
As what I've learned about the world as a very, very young child. And the term is introject. I-N-T-R-O-J-E-C-T. If my mother's very warm and loving, the world is good. Me, others in the world, pretty good place. Same idea, kind of as attachment, a little different, but. So Kohut talks about, his work was with narcissistic personality disorders. Patients, interesting enough, that Freud had considered to be unanalyzable because they couldn't invest and engage a relationship with an analyst. They were too busy being in a relationship with themselves. And Freud believed that unless the countertransference or transference occurred, and that strong therapeutic relationship between himself and the client, which, because he was a medical doctor, they referred to him as patients, that the work could not happen. So Kohut developed self-psychology. And he argued that narcissistic personality difficulties result from a failure to develop confident feelings about oneself as a result of poor experiences with either inadequate or unavailable parents. And that self-love and self-admiration sprang from a powerful need, unmet need, which kind of goes back to Adlerian, for attention and admiration. So if you can't give it to me, I will give it to myself. If you can't care about me, I will care about myself to the exclusion of caring about anyone else.
For NPD?
Narcissists say, basically, if you think about it, operationalize the borderline saying, I love you, I hate you, you're my hero, you're my zero, get out of my house, please don't leave me. Narcissists say, if not me, who? If not now, when? From the Greek myth, where Narcissus was so in love with his reflection in the pool that he got weaker and weaker from not eating and drowned. So, psychoanalysis and family dynamics, Nathan Ackerman. And the reason that I'm going over these so laboriously is these are on the big test. And understanding them and distinguishing them from the other is important. So, Ackerman was a psychoanalytically trained child psychiatrist in the child guidance movement. He began to attend to the family as a social and emotional unit because the family had so much impact on the child's development. He began devising clinical techniques to apply psychoanalytic principles to treat preschool children and their families in a collaborative approach. He founded the Child Guidance Clinic at Miniature Clinic in Topeka, Kansas. That is on the test. He experimented by seeing whole families for diagnostic and therapeutic reasons. And he also went out to families' homes, which was probably a new move in that time. Ackerman is sometimes thought of as the grandfather of family therapy. He saw each individual as an important subsystem within the family, just as the family is a subsystem within the community, which is a subsystem within other larger supersystems above that level. At the family level, he viewed a symptom as part of a recurring, predictable interactional pattern intending to assure equilibrium for the individual but impairing family homeostasis by producing distortions in family role relationships. So, if I am struggling, if I am having problems, anxiety, depression, I am going to have defense mechanisms. I'm going to have things in place to help me function. And while I'm trying to function, I'm going to try to gain equilibrium and balance from my position in the family. While I'm doing that, though, sometimes that disrupts the homeostasis, the balance for the family as a whole.
Lest they get well.
Lest they get well. And we would no longer be needed. A failure of complementarity, the top of page 135, is an Ackerman term. It characterizes roles played by various family members in respect to each other, where change and growth becomes constricted. Roles become too rigid, too narrowly defined, too stereotyped, causing confusion. So that definition is on the test. Ackerman also saw family roles: healer, rescuer, persecutor, scapegoater, and in 1956 he presented a conceptual model of interlocking pathology in family relationships. He was concerned with the family environment, interaction and development of childhood disorders. He noted that the constant interchange of unconscious processes taking place between family members as they're bound together in particular interactional patterns can either work interlocking for pathology, either work for healing or work for pathology. Page 136 and 137 is a clinical vignette showing Ackerman's active, challenging interventions. You might want to take a look at that. He was very interesting in many ways. He was always interested in roles, how those roles were assigned, how those roles were maintained, who defined those roles, who assigned them, he believed that as his job as a family therapist was a catalyst, and he should, very similar to Mnuchin, in the joining of the family dynamics, he believed he should enter the living space of the family, stir up interaction, very much like Jay Haley was strategic. Initiate a meaningful exchange, and find the deeper emotional currents: fear, suspicion, despair, vengeance, revenge. And one term that you'll see on the test at the bottom of page 138, that's an Ackerman term, is tickling the defenses. It was picked back up by Jay Haley in strategic therapy because none of them really, except maybe the very early fathers, had their own. The other theorists diverged from, changed, but kept a lot of their work. Tickling the fences is gently provoking participants to openly, honestly express what they feel. Catch them off guard, expose rationalizations, have them come out of the closet with their second-order emotions. What really was going on. And he was an expert at doing that with families. Going back into object relations therapy, which is Freud labeled inborn sexual and aggressive impulse as the N, which is a drive for the driving force for the interactions in an individual and family. Freud labeled ego and superego the soil from which psychopathology grows. The issue of the ego, the rational self, struggling between the id, the unbound natural impulses, and the superego, the morals, the shoulds, woulds, must, and acting out on impulse unconsciously becomes associated with danger of reprisal, getting in trouble, physical punishment, loss of love for someone, a key figure in the life. Object relationship theory views an infant's experiences, turning over to page 140, with the mother as the primary determinant of adult personality formation. This is attachment theory. Bowlby in 1969 picked this up, looked at issues of attachment theory, lost to be central in functioning in humans and higher mammals. You must resolve those issues to determine personality development and possible psychopathology. Freud first used the term objects in relationship to instinctual drives, in the context of early mother-child bonds, but other theorists expanded on object relationships to refer to it as an internal, largely unconscious view of how I have formed from my past experiences, how my childhood has shaped my current relationship with other, which is St. Clair. Melanie Klein, a British psychoanalyst, immigrated from Vienna, provided much of the foundation with Kohut of object relations theory. She had insights into the pre-verbal inner world of the child. That's why play therapy comes into play when children are not able to use language, their natural language is play, or clients who have been traumatized or abused that are not able to directly participate in traditional talk therapy. Coming from Klein's lead, many of these other therapists, none of which I see would be necessarily in the forefront of the work, began to add to their understanding of an infant's basic struggle to come to terms with sexual and aggressive impulses and acquiring gratification from a parent. Fairburn, however, in 1952, a psychiatrist from Scotland who worked primarily with schizoid adults, followed up on Klein's work but rejected her acceptance of Freud's drive motivation. He went with purely psychological explanations. Fairbairn's known and his contribution is this term splitting in object relations. So the first year of life, a child internalizes an image of the mother as a good object. She feeds me, she changes me, she rocks me. But you know what? Someday she's a bad object. She doesn't show up, she's inaccessible, she's frustrated, she's angry. How can I put those two together? So I have to split them into separate camps and have distinct internal relationships with separate objects. The good object, the good mother, becomes very idealized, allowing the child to feel loved. The latter is rejecting anger, loss of love, the child's longing to regain that love, and it is a way of, maybe not a functional way or a healthy way, but a way parents have of controlling children's behaviors. So that really kind of plays into what we've learned about unconditional love for individuals, because while we cannot be all good or all bad at any given time, loving someone based on their desired behaviors can lead to some very significant personality disorders. Fairbairn talks about interjects, which is the same word, good, bad, objects, interjects. And interjects is an imprint of the parent or significant figure into that person's psyche. How do I understand myself, others, and the world? And how do I resolve the splitting between there being sometimes good, I'm wanting them always to be good, and sometimes bad, and how do you avoid that, and how do you go back and repair the damage and get back to where it was good again?
So does it synthesize, or do you stay split?
I think it depends on the family and the individual.
And the goal is to synthesize, not to split.
The goal is to synthesize, but also to understand that no one person can be perfect, which babies are not at that place. But as you grow, as you mature, and no one person can always be there, it's never possible that that person will never let me down. So you kind of go with the preponderance of the evidence. Is this a good, loving person, or is it not? And children have such a need for their parents to love and accept them that even very poor parents can be conceptualized by children as being loving and good. Keeping that up is very difficult. Projective identification on page 142 is an interactive mental process in which marital partners unconsciously defend against anxiety by projecting, externalizing, split off unwanted parts of themselves onto their partners, who are then manipulated to behave in accordance with this projection. So, the easiest thing I can think of to explain this is, if you have an unfaithful partner, what do they always do in therapy? If they are unfaithful and they come and sit before you in counseling, what do they do? Instantly, they accuse the other partner of infidelity, of flirt. So the very thing I'm doing that I fear that you will find out that I'm doing, I'm going to project that onto you, right? You're going to defend yourself. I'm going to not believe you. I'm going to think that you're lying. You're going to defend yourself some more. Kind of a natural, not healthy, but natural outcome of that sometime is the mentality, if I'm going to be accused of this, I might as well do it. Okay? Then, the person who was cheating originally is vindicated because, see, I was right, you do cheat. It's okay for me to cheat because you cheat. Even if I drove you to it by accusations and manipulation. So that's what projective identification is. The very thing I hate or reject about myself, if it's unbearable to me in here, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to throw it off onto a child, a pet, a parent, a partner, society. Ma'am?
Could that also be, I'm going to find that in people?
I'm going to target it.
Like, if they do have it, like you'll be the one to pick it up on it. Other people might not.
Maybe.
This isn't just a variable term.
No. The other example I can think of, if you have someone who's extremely prejudiced against a certain group or subgroup of people, they are likely to target and point out prejudices that exist in other cultural groups. Because if group A, if I'm prejudiced against groups B and C, because I see myself as belonging to group A, a superior group. If I can find prejudicial behaviors between B and C, or back toward my group, then it's all justified. Everybody's doing it. I'm just doing it for the right reason because I'm in the superior group. But all you guys are doing it.
That's what it's called.
It's like that.
But it does occur. Like Dexter. That's sad.
Can objective identification be positive also?
Well,
Or is it, because that's a pretty negative example.
it's usually very negative in its interaction. The only thing I can think of that's positive is if you want good results, like if you have a child that you want to get better behavior from, and you start just saying, oh, thank you so much for being polite and waiting while, even if the child didn't even know you were getting up to go through the door. Thank you so much for being polite and waiting for me to go out the door. As we go out together, would you please turn on a light, where you're assuming good behaviors? I could see if that might be a positive. I don't know that a theorist might take exception to that example, but that's the one that occurs to me. So, looking at page 143, object relations focus provides a bridge linking, this is probably the important issue right here. Object relations focus provides a bridge linking psychoanalytic therapy and family therapy. It moves beyond drive theory. It moves beyond instinctual loadings of erogenous zones, which is the id. It moves beyond intrapsychic processes like nurturing figure to the infant. Its emphasis makes it more consistent with interactional views of systemically oriented family therapy. So, page 144. You guys are going to know more about MFT theory than you ever want to know, but maybe it'll help you pass the test. Object relations and family of origin. We finally got to my favorite theorist other than Freud, because Freud rules. In psychodynamic theory is James Framo, and he's family of origin. I did it that way because that's the way my mama and grandmama did it. It's what I know. It's what I learned. Even if it's wrong, even if it's unhealthy, even if it's dysfunctional, even if it's causing me problems, it's what I know. So he says that people usually don't select the partner they want. They go out and get the partner they need. They're drawn to someone who will recreate childhood dreams of unconditional love, but is enough like the bad interject object to allow old hatreds to be projected. So he sees that we marry our parents over and over. And if you look at people who divorce over and over and remarry, they either tend to marry the same person, not the same identical person, but the same type of person, or they flip. So you might have someone who marries a very large psychotic person, and they flip over and marry a very weak person, and then the third time they marry another large psychotic person. So I'm getting one just like them or just someone totally different. But those relationships tend to not work out until we do what?
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, what?
What do we have to do for our relationships to work out well? Who has to be fixed?
Yeah,
We have to be fixed. That's why they talk about in a more recent therapy about unpacking the baggage, not taking old stuff into new relationships, which I think is a very hard thing for people to do. How do we have people, how do we find spouses that will live up to our wild fantasies and our unrealistic expectations? It's very easy in the first grows of love, because we're in love with love. And the hormones and the pheromones and all these things interact with being in love. And we wear rose-colored glasses or blinders. And when those things come off and we see the person that we're actually in the bed with, and in the kitchen with, and in the car with, and coming home to, some of that doesn't hold up. And then we begin to find fault because we see the same rejection from that person that we saw in our families and the person that was supposed to love us, our parents.
So, same.
Did you say pause? Yes, so I thought you had a question.
I thought, excuse me, the whole we marry our parents thing came originally from Freud. And then I found out, maybe that comes from Oedipus. But it sounds like you're saying James Framo is the first person who actually put that spin on it and said, no, it's a thing. It's a real thing.
What Freud did is when he encountered Will Hans and he had no way to explain it, he went back to the Greek
Who authored
theory.
Oedipus? Sophocles? He did Antigone, right? So, yes.
So, and he said, oh look, there's a Greek play about this. This has been going on from the beginning of time. Okay? So he's not saying that that we marry our parents. Freud said that there is a natural sexual aggressive impulse that says, I love my mother, I want to kill my father, but he's bigger than I am and he's got a larger penis than I do. And he sees mine and knows that I'm growing and he may castrate me. So now I have this intense free-floating anxiety and neurotic fear that I'm not being able to acknowledge because it's socially unacceptable to love my mother and have sexual jealousy between me and my father.
Kids don't know that.
Little Hans probably did, but he wasn't born that way, he was made that way. Okay, and that's who Freud modeled this after. If you look at page 145, Framo says, the most powerful obstacle to change is people's attachment to parental interjects. The more psychologically painful an early life experience is, the greater investment in internal objects, the more the adult will engage in an unconscious effort to make all close relationships fit that internal role model in their head. That means until I can fix that, I'm going to marry the same negative partner. He says they choose a partner that they hope will cancel out, replicate, control, master, live through, heal, a framework which could not be settled internally in the person. We have to settle all of our childhood relationships with our parents, good, bad, or in between, and become whole prior to being able to be a whole member of a partnership, an adult partnership.
So we should make premarital counseling, pre-partnering counseling, what is this word, compulsory?
Yes, and which you'll see in, with Prepared and Rich and something, if we looked back in these earlier chapters, they talked about that.
Should is relative, what do you say?
That's why I'm still single. I'm aware of all this.
Ma'am? I can't hear you.
I said that's why I'm still single, because I'm aware of all
Oh, you're single because you're aware of all this? Oh my goodness.
Heal thyself.
It's very similar to, if you'll look at the different theories, you'll see the same words and thoughts and constructs, just flipped a little bit. This is very much matched with Erickson's life task, stages of life, psychosocial theory. So, what is my job as a teenager? What am I supposed to be doing after I decide identity, what my identity versus role confusion is once I've accomplished that task? As a young adult, intimacy or isolation. Am I going to be able to be with somebody or not?
Now, according to what we have here, I don't know his exhaustive theory, but he gives us sort of two portions of life, where the damage happens, and then healing the damage to move on, or not healing the damage and not moving on. But he parses it into two, right?
So what do you see? Do you see healed people? Or do you see people who are damaged with some degree of awareness and insight?
I feel like that's the vast majority. Not just the people that are seeing, but...
Because we see a skewed population, that's who comes here. All the healthy people out there obviously probably don't come through these doors and pay money weekly. But what about the ones that have these issues that still don't come?
That's why I say compulsory.
Yes.
We'll get that over the light.
And most people do not choose isolation. Most people choose intimacy, even if it's with multiple partners in very dysfunctional ways. So therapeutically, Fredo began to treat the entire family, and he says the presenting problem involves the children because who brings families into treatment? An identified client, typically a child, or a scapegoated member. The symbolic client is who?
The system.
The family, or the other. And the identified client is the one that they're saying is the problem. We're all good, and this one person's causing a lot of problems. Symptomatic behavior in one person in the family may be a means of deflecting attention from the marital conflict. If we can triangulate on this bad kid, we don't have to deal with our marital issues. So, one of the things that is done in therapy is to detriangulate the child from the parents. He typically, Fredo would dismiss the children and work with the marital couple, the couple dyad, sometimes in groups. Family of origin, great stuff. Object relations family therapy is Scharf and Scharf as distinguished from object relations therapy with Kohut. These were married partners of the Washington School of Psychiatry. You see a trend here, they all are in the same places. Digging, paddling to get their own theories and books and speaking dates out there. Money was there to be made. They talk about transference and countertransference as an exploratory effort to a greater understanding and growth. They were very consistent with drive theory. They believe that couples bring a lot of resistance to counseling and that you have to work through the resistance to make them aware of their repressed impulses or maybe their repulsive impulses. So that was a Freudian slip right there for those of you who are watching. They opposed the blank screen stance of classical psychoanalysts. They did adopt a neutral stand of involved impartiality. So, I am with you. We are triangulated in this therapeutic relationship. I and thou, very much like Fritz Perls and Bowlby. But I am not going to triangulate with one partner over the other. I'm going to be impartial because I am supporting the couple or the family. Top of page 148, I'm supporting them in a shared holding environment, a safe place. A lot of these things that you don't see these terms anymore, we have just revamped them and we call therapy a safe place. But it originated from this idea of a shared holding environment. A place that we can resolve our problems in safety and confidentiality and support. That's the idea. Page 149, Kohut and self-psychology. In this little discussion, they talk about that infants do not view their parents as separate persons. There comes a point when a child individuates from their parent, usually around 18 months to 2 years old, when they learn to say no, and they understand they have a will and mind of their own and desires of their own. Until that point, Kohut believed that the child saw their parents as an extension of themselves, as self-objects. No real distinction between self and the mother's praise. No real distinction between self and the mother's anger or the mother's neglect, which really helps you understand how that internalized process took place within the child's psyche, and then it forms an autonomous self characterized by self-acceptance and esteem, or neglect and rejection. That children have their needs mirrored by their parents, have very satisfying interactions. Less fortunate children whose parents fail to demonstrate mirroring have very unhappy experiences and continue to crave admiring attention, hence narcissists, borderline people, dependent people, the rest of their life. So narcissism is a necessity for infants, because I have to think about myself, that's the stage of development I'm at. I've got to cry until I get fed. I have to cry until I get picked up and the cracks in my leg go away. I have to cry until my diaper is changed. But the hope is that we don't stay at that place. Kohut contended that an infant's core contains a self-centered, grandiose, exhibitionist part, particularly if the parent offers unconditional love. Babies have a way of getting their needs met because they're intrinsically charismatic and cute, and people like them. Older people, nursing home patients, cancer patients, have to get their needs met. They're not intrinsically cute.
I disagree. Old people are precious.
They may be precious, but a lot of times they're treated very poorly because they're not considered as helpless as babies, but not considered to be as attractive.
Some can be mean.
You're gonna have to speak up.
I think some of them can be mean.
Old people can be.
I've seen it.
Oh God. For analysis to be effective, according to Kohut, the reactivation of the original developmental tendencies must take place with the parents. Persons with disorder must be mirrored, respected and attended to, permitted to deal with authentic relationships. He believes in countertransference, that they're allowed to idealize the therapist and take the place of kind of the parent, so they can go back in and fix these things that appear to be wrong. So, before we go, I wanted to look at some psychodynamic and point some things out to you very quickly. Anthony and April have collaborated on this PowerPoint that will be in the classroom drive. This PowerPoint very much delineates all of the pieces of psychodynamic play therapy, but it tracks psychoanalytical and psychodynamic approaches. If you look at it, it gives you the key figures, the history, how change occurs, what happens with catharsis, releasing negative feelings, labeling those feelings to decrease their intensity, being able to access the unconscious and the subconscious and bring it to the conscious level. Yes. How to ask questions. One thing I think that we did not talk about in this that I wanted to talk about, what were some of the interventions that Freud used? That psychodynamic and psychoanalytic
Word association.
word association, free association. So we talked about, particularly if you're in the dark, lying on a couch with candles lit and soft music, and Freud is behind you, self-injecting cocaine while you're free associating. But we did this once. We could try it. I don't know how it will work. We'll see where it goes. So we'll just go in a round robin. Chair.
What?
Sit. Stand.
Say it again.
Stand.
Store.
Like, baby.
Father.
Cry.
Attend. So if you go from there, we naturally went back to what? Family care and nurturing. Because maybe that's where we're driven. Maybe drive theory works. And if you have very troubled clients and you try this with them, you can get some very bizarre responses. And the idea is the defense mechanisms are pulled down and they're not being asked to participate in therapy. They're just doing word associations. And sometimes, and it does have to do with Freudian slips. It has to do with the fact that we want to talk about it. Sometimes the very thing that needs to be said gets said. It's not something that's in great use, but it wouldn't hurt to look into it at times, as long as you take care of the basic needs of your clients. The house tree person, we have a book in our library by Buck. House tree person, the house is symbolic of ourselves, our inner selves. The person out here is the person that we, our externalized person, whereas our house person is safe and secure. And the tree represents the external world. You can hear other interpretations of that, but that's a generally accepted one. What other intervention was Freud famous for? What did he believe in analyzing? Yeah, April a cookie, trees. Okay, so in the drive, you will see several psychodynamic interventions, and they have pictures. One that I would direct your attention to is sand tray, that within Jung and some of Anna Freud and Melanie Klein's work that they did sand tray with clients. There is a very clear direction on how to do this and how to construct these. In the play therapy part of the marriage and family course, we do these as we go along. The kinetic family drawing is very Freudian, very psychoanalytically driven. The family must be drawn, every member of the family, including the client, and not stick people, but have full figures and full facial expressions, and they must be doing something. So that the intervention is having the client do the family kinetic drawing, but the work is done in the processing. Person picking an apple from a tree is very, very simple. Draw a picture of a person picking an apple from a tree. The directions are over. And it is based on the formal elements art therapy scale, the FEAT scale. It has to do with nurturing and accessibility to resources and ability to communicate needs. You will see some clients who cannot reach the apples. They have no ladder. Some have no hands. Some have no basket. Others have everything they need. It can be very interesting as a diagnostic and assessment tool. The Johari window, the views of me. My open window is everything I see about me and everything you see. My closed window